What you see on the screen now is not going to be the future of gaming. It's not going to be Ready Player One. AI NPCs are a real thing, but they have glaring issues.
Greetings, mortal. I am an evil wizard, and I am here to take over the world.
Can you really trust game companies to create something out of this world? Nowadays, the actual gameplay plays second fiddle to the in-game shop, and as profits pile in, the companies don't want to spend millions on a game that could flop. They want to build something that prints them money. The way I see the future of gaming is how I think people in the 50s viewed flying cars. Everyone thought that they were inevitable, and it wasn't like the technology didn't exist, but it was impractical and expensive, so we ended up with cars glued on the ground. Maybe one day we can fly in a car, but not anytime soon. The future of gaming is in a very similar situation. VR has been around for a while now, but the technology for the immersive VR that people are expecting in the future is still being developed. And smart NPCs are being made with stuff like ChatGPT, but that's still going to take some time for it to actually be implemented. The other issue is that this market's still very small, not a lot of people are really buying them. And look at Meta, they burned through money trying to create the metaverse. If they couldn't accomplish it with billions of dollars, why would other companies even attempt to try? The biggest games in the world right now are mobile games, and more companies are trying to join that fight. This is the great thing if you're a mobile gamer, but what about the rest of us? Are we going to be forgotten? Even as mobile devices get stronger and the cloud improves, they will never be able to provide the immersive experience other platforms do. Are companies going to move on from AAA games? No, just look at the past year. But there might not be as many. And is gaming really just going to be microtransactions and have gacha mechanics forever? Well, yes, but it may get better. Now, before I get ahead of myself, I do need to give some context. I'm going to start by explaining the current gaming market. And just to preface, before anyone gets mad at me, this is a YouTube video, not a PhD paper. Some of the stats and numbers may not be exact, but they are definitely in the ballpark. You'd be amazed at how many different numbers there are for the same thing. Anyways, as of September 2023, there are around 3.1 billion gamers worldwide. The majority of this consists of people playing on mobile, with PC in second and consoles in third. If you add all these numbers up, they don't match. And that's because people do play on more than one platform. All you need to know is that mobile is dominant in this because of its ease of access. There are about 6.92 billion people that use a phone. Looking at it that way, companies foam at the mouth thinking of trying to convert these users into players. And you know the equation, more players equals more money. Speaking of money, the total gaming industry's revenue for 2022 was around $183 billion, with it being projected to reach $500 billion by 2030. Mobile alone accounted for more than half of that. Knowing this, what do you think the top 3 video game companies are? In Q3 of 2022, it was Tencent, Sony, and Nintendo. Apple was the third biggest company by revenue. Now this is probably going to be a surprise, as most people outside of China have never even heard of Tencent before. They own game companies like Riot Games, Epic Games, and Supercell. There will be more on that later. The head scratcher here is obviously Apple. They don't actually make any games, so them being third on this list testifies at how big mobile gaming is. The App Store takes a 30% cut from any app or in-app purchase on Apple devices. Now 30% does seem like a lot, but it is the standard. The Google Play Store does the exact same thing. Even Steam and PlayStation also take 30%. There are countless nuances to the cuts, but just know that they all do it. Now the two stores that only take 12% are the Epic Games Store and Microsoft Store. And I say it only, but it's still a very high amount, but there just isn't much game developers can do to get around it. This is why on PC there's so many different stores and launchers for your games. Sorry, I'm getting off track here. I glossed over Sony as the second biggest gaming company in the world. Now they make their money in a couple different ways. They make it from the PS5, the PlayStation Store, PlayStation Plus, their own games they make. But even with all that, they still want to get a strong push into mobile. They've also been making strides on PC by porting games over. Their goal by 2025 is to have half of the releases on PC and mobile. They're a driver in the industry, but they have fallen very far behind in the mobile space over the last decade. They had extremely popular Fate Grand Order game, making them around $7 billion in the past 8 years, but that was mainly in Japan and their only big success. Even Microsoft is dabbling in the mobile world with the purchase of Activision Blizzard, who own King, the makers of Candy Crush. PlayStation is a great system and shouldn't be a problem, but year after year they keep missing out on these big mobile games. Especially with the great IP they own, there's a lot of different games that they can make and make a lot of money. A country that exemplifies this is China. As it stands right now, China has 740 million gamers. Their total revenue from gaming is around $51 billion for 2022. 80% of that coming from mobile. The government in China is very strict on who can make and publish games there, so it's a tough market for foreign companies to penetrate. But whenever that's changed, or if it's changed, companies that are prepared will be able to make a pretty penny in China. Currently, Tencent is enjoying the current regulations. They're the largest company in China, owning the super app Twitter wants to be, WeChat. Like I mentioned earlier, they own some of the biggest game companies in the world, while also having large shares in other companies. So if Sony's a driver in the industry, Tencent is a pilot. Take Valorant, League of Legends, and Fortnite, all owned by Tencent. They're some of the biggest games in the world, and they all now have a mobile version. The money-making part is still on PC, but over time, do not be surprised if the mobile versions start to make more money. All companies can do this: take some popular game they own, spin it into a mobile version, and print money. And with the increase in power of phones, this will happen more and more. Now, this whole concept applies more to the free-to-play model in general, rather than just mobile gaming. But mobile games are almost exclusively free-to-play. I'm referring to the consistent revenues that these games make, using skins or pay-to-win techniques. I'm not going to get into the history of it, but this has been reiterated over the past 20 years. Every company has tried it or has implemented some version of it in their games. This stems from something in the general business world. All businesses are just an alterated copy of something else. One of the best companies at this is Instagram. They single-handedly almost killed off Snapchat when they introduced stories, and they did actually finish off fine with videos. And nowadays, every company wants a piece of what TikTok is doing. YouTube Shorts, Reels, Snapchat Spotlight. These companies don't even try to hide that they're just copying. Gaming companies are no different, whether it be features in the game like a Battle Pass, Battle Royale, free-to-play, funky cosmetics, gambling, pre-order bonuses, Ultimate Editions, Early Access. The next iteration is going to be making their game mobile, whether that be the same game or something similar. Arguably, it already is a thing, but just expect it to expand. Now, as an avid gamer myself, I wouldn't consider most mobile games actual games. A lot of them are just time wasters like Candy Crush. Of course, though, that time waster has accrued over $20 billion over the past 11 years. Whether it be considered actual gaming or not, the money doesn't lie. I mentioned that mobile dominated total gaming revenue last year, so what I'm about to show you shouldn't be shocking. The highest grossing game of 2022 is one I'd never even heard of before making this. It's called Honor of Kings, a MOBA that is basically League of Legends. I can't go into any more detail than that as I've only seen a little bit gameplay and it's a China-only game. Number 2 is PUBG, which may come as a surprise, but it's carried by its Chinese version, Game for Peace. Dungeon Fighter is an 18-year-old PC game that originated in Korea. Tencent helped them launch their mobile game version of it in China. Genshin Impact isn't just mobile, but it is heavily driven by China's mobile players. Here's the rest of that list in case you were curious. I found it quite interesting myself. 13 out of the top 20 games are mobile, or at least have a mobile version. This is driven by China, but not entirely. This is because, like I said earlier, China spends 80% of their gaming revenue on mobile games. But it's unique compared to the rest of the world due to the fact that their gaming population is so large and the culture surrounding video games is stricter. This stems from the past where it was harder for countries like Korea and China to actually import consoles to their country. So a lot of them took up on PC games or mobile games before, and they kind of just stuck with it. If we travel across the Pacific Ocean back to the US, it's the opposite. PC and console gaming is the more popular choice. At the same time, all these gamers also have at least 1 or 2 mobile games they like to play, but typically in a more casual way. And if you look past the younger crowd, mobile games are a lot more accessible to people over 35, whether that be time commitment or the accessibility.
I'm sorry. Wait a minute.
Now, accessibility is very attractive for these companies making these mobile games, but that's not the only thing that's attractive to them. I know I already mentioned about more players equals more money, but there's another key factor in that a lot of people overlook, and that's how the image of their company looks to investors. So not only are these companies going to be making money through their actual games, they're going to be making money through their stocks going up. Now, a key factor in a lot of stocks going up is how their future looks. Because most of the time, stocks aren't priced in today, they're priced for the future. And a key indicator for that is their growth rate. Now, growth stocks are more risky than something like Coca-Cola, where they're not going to grow very much very fast. But companies like Apple, which is the biggest company in the world, can still be argued to be a growth stock. Now, I mention this because mobile gaming is still growing in users and revenue, and both are at a faster rate than the console and PC counterparts. What this means is, companies are going to go heavy in the mobile side of things to capitalize on these rates. Over the past 12 years, there have been about $46 billion spent on mobile game companies. Some of these investments really panned out, like King and Moontime. Others didn't pan out great, but nonetheless, you can see as time went on, more and more companies were gobbled up. But this shows that these companies are expecting mobile gaming to continue to get bigger and bigger, meaning they should funnel more money towards it. Even if they don't use the same game IP that they bought, the companies behind them should continue to produce new mobile games. Companies have to stay ahead to stay alive. A lot of times when a company buys another company, it's usually good for the stock price and means they're trying to grow. Stagnation in the business world is not good. And for some, this meant buying other companies. For others, it meant a pivot in a new direction, like Nintendo with their mobile games. And you may be thinking, well, why can't they do both? Make AAA console games and also make mobile games. They can, and they will. The difference will be where their focus will actually be. I have no doubt that there will always be AAA games to come out. This year alone has been wonderful, though an outlier because of COVID pushbacks. I want to use the example of The Last of Us Part 2. Reports came out that it cost around $220 million to create. That isn't the highest on the list, but it's still very expensive. When making a game like this, Naughty Dog, the creators of it, took a big risk. They have to put a good product out. It's something that took over 5 years and 2,100 people to create. Now, the game was expected to sell well because of the first game, and it did. It sold around 10 million copies. But it was very close to flopping. If you don't remember or didn't follow it at the time, the script for the game was leaked around a month before the game actually came out. There are two things that could have sunk the ship. One, the plot being revealed for any story-based media is usually not a good thing. It can ruin the experience because the consumer already knows what will happen. The other thing also corresponds to the plot, and it's just the fact that the game specifically was very controversial. I'm not going to go into the details here, but just know not a lot of fans were happy with the story. Spending 5 years and that many people on a single project is super risky, and especially when they're only going to be making the money at the initial sale, around $60 or $70 depending on what console you bought it on. Where I'm getting at with this is that a lot of these companies don't really want to risk that much time and that many people to one project only to see it fail. Even if the game is great and amazing, it could be the best game of all time. If no one buys it for that price tag, then nobody's going to actually play it and in turn spend any money. Now if you take a game like Genshin Impact, a free-to-play game, then that changes the story a little bit. Now the game itself cost around $100 million to create, an absurd amount when looking at the game itself, and it also costs around $100 to $200 million a year to keep it running smooth and providing updates. And if you look at just the revenue last year, it makes sense. And this game was designed to be on every single platform. It's the way a lot of games are going to be designed in the future. And I don't really mean the gameplay itself, since not everyone is going to gush over anime characters and drop stupid money over it, but more the way it was released. A game that can be played on every platform the same way. Everyone has their preferences, but honestly, mobile is the easiest to use. You can play it anywhere. You can play it while you're waiting for the dentist, the doctors, at a restaurant. You'll be able to play anything and everything on there soon, and everyone has one. The reason why making games for all platforms is bad for AAA games is that they have to tailor the games for everything. This means that there's going to be less hardware requirements for the games. And while that's not a bad thing since they're more accessible now, that means a lot of the games are going to be hindered in what they're able to do. And phones are getting stronger and stronger, so this will be less of an issue as time goes on. But this again leads to the point of why even make games for consoles when the phone itself can be the console. There's nothing wrong with this, as long as mobile can provide the same level of quality. But that's the issue. The real problem is that all these moves to mobile will push back other innovations to make games better. Expecting something like Ready Player One is a stretch, and not everyone wishes for that, but that future will not be anytime soon. Companies have no incentive to even try to create this or invest in this outcome because there's no market for it. And trying to create a market for it almost ended one of the biggest companies in the world. Imagine a big game studio working on cool VR games. You can't because they're not doing it right now. This isn't to say that no one's working on this stuff, but the big companies are going to wait until a smaller company makes a very successful game in VR, and then they'll make a move into the platform. It is the way the game is played, just like Fortnite in 2017 and 2018-ish. Companies copy the hot thing because it's proven to be successful. The next big thing in gaming, and the most likely outcome in the near future, is going to be the use of AI. This ranges from smart NPCs to generative worlds. Smart NPCs are just NPCs that have a lot more options that they can do using AI. There are companies working on this like Replica Studios. You might have already seen some demos played on Unreal Engine 5. This again will take time to implement and will take a game to be successful with it for others to actually try it. The biggest issue with this is the lack of experienced developers that can actually use these tools. AI can also be used to improve the game itself or the development process, but there are a lot of variables with this strong technology. The only consistent variable in all this is knowing that game companies are not your friend. This knowledge can let us assume that the game's main goal is to make a profit, with the game being good as a selling point. The developers work on the games may not feel this way, and they probably don't. But sadly, they don't have much of a choice. This helps explain why so many games come out rushed or games feel bland. The game itself is just a way to sell skins or in-game currency, or just sell copies of it. It just so happens that mobile is also the most used platform, and again, more players equals more money. And while I do think most games will be tailored towards mobile gamers, there is still hope for great titles and advancements in gaming. Whether that be Mark Zuckerberg figuring out how to actually make the metaverse cool, or maybe it could be a game that can self-generate assets. One thing is for certain though, these innovations probably won't be done by the current leaders in the industry. For them, their future is mobile.